Okay, cool. Yeah, so just a friendly reminder that the test will be available next week, Thursday and Friday. And as always, Saturdays I'll release the answers, and then Monday we're gonna go over the test, and then in 2 weeks, Thursday and Friday, we're gonna have the makeup exam. So it's the same pattern as always, as with the first test. 25 multiple choice questions. Is going to cover only 4 chapters, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Today I'm going to do chapter 13, which is not going to be very long. It's we already know it's chapter 13 is basically kind of like a recap of the material that we did in chapters 10 and 12. And tomorrow I'm going to cover chapter 12, and with that we are done. And next week on Monday, I'm going to have a review for the test. So I'll take a look at the test before I have the review, and then I'm going to have it. So far, okay. Have you watched all my videos? Hopefully you did. You did all the quizzes. I know, and I apologize again for the quizzes. You know, they're not like they used to be. You just have a picture of a quiz. You know, you have to cover the answers, and then reveal the answers and see how you did. Okay. Anyway, okay. So let's go into the material. So chapter 13 is about fiscal policy. Okay, I gotta throw this out. And I gotta throw this out. So what is fiscal policy? Is whatever the government does to taxes or spending, because those are the tools that are available to the government, spending and taxes. G, increases and decreases in spending, and T, taxes, increases and decreases in taxes. So what the government does to move the economy in the desired direction. And obviously, like I said, changes in G and or changes in taxes. So those are the tools, the only tools that the government has at its discretion in order to move the economy, to change the aggregate demand, to shift aggregate demand to the right or shift aggregate demand to the left. Of course, we all know that it's very rare that the government wants to shift aggregate demand to the left, because that slows down the economy. So that would only happen if the economy was so strong, so good, that there would be danger of inflation. And then they have to cool off the economy. So we really didn't get into that much because, well, it doesn't happen very often. Much more often, the government wants to stimulate the economy, to stimulate aggregate demand and shift aggregate demand to the left, to the right, I'm sorry, to create more jobs and put people to work. Okay, so let's take a look at the 2 types of fiscal policy that are available. Fiscal policy can be either, I don't know why, I cannot find a decent pen. Fiscal policy can be either expansionary or contractionary. And the government will pursue an expansionary fiscal policy when the economy is in a recession. So when there is a recessionary gap. So when we have a recessionary gap, the government pursues an expansionary fiscal policy. In other words, they want to expand the economy. And a contractionary fiscal policy, they want to contract the economy. So they're going to pursue an expansionary, a contractionary fiscal policy when there's an inflationary gap or an expansionary gap. So when there is an expansionary gap. Remember, we called it when the economy is operating above full employment, we call that an expansionary gap or an inflationary gap. Either term, it means the same thing. And here, a recessionary gap, you can call it a recessionary gap or a contractionary gap. That means exactly the same thing, is the amount by which the economy operates below full employment. So in the case of an expansionary gap, well, what can the government do to close that recessionary gap? What can the government do to close the recessionary gap? And I want you to tell me, somebody just yell out, what can the government do to its spending, to their spending, to close a recessionary gap? Should they increase or decrease government spending?
Increase.
Increase government spending. So expansionary gap means government spending going up. And or what else can they do to taxes in order to close that recessionary gap?
Decrease the taxes.
Decrease taxes, exactly. So they give us more money in order for us to do what? To take that money and
spend it.
To buy more products to consumers.
Exactly. Put that money to work, spend that money. That's the whole idea. We want to spend. We want money to be spent in order to create more jobs, in order to get an incentive for firms to hire additional workers. So you want to create this increase in aggregate demand. So either the government can give us more money so we can spend it in the form of tax cuts, or the government can actually spend the money themselves. But remember, if they want to increase their spending, the government is not going to raise taxes in order to increase the spending, because if they would raise taxes, they would actually pursue an expansionary fiscal policy and a contractionary fiscal policy at the same time. So when the government wants to increase the spending, what they do is they borrow the money. Okay. Well, contractionary gap. How does the government pursue a contractionary gap? Well, obviously it's going to be exactly the opposite of pursuing an expansionary fiscal policy. If they are pursuing a contractionary fiscal policy, they're going to reduce their spending. They're going to cut orders on all kinds of things that no longer have to be produced. Obviously, that's going to slow down the economy. Obviously, Martin Marietta is not going to have as many orders. General Dynamics is not going to have as many orders. Hughes is not going to have as many orders. Whoever, defense contractors, they're not going to have orders. Well, that's going to slow down the economy, and that's going to cool off the economy. Well, that doesn't really help. Or increase taxes on us. That's another tool for contractionary fiscal policy. They're taking money away from us so that we cannot spend it. Okay, now let's focus again. Oh, by the way, before I forget, this is something that I do want to mention. I probably would remember to mention it at the review time, but it's worth mentioning again. Folks, on a test, you may see a question about what constitutes expansionary or contractionary fiscal policy. And you got to remember, and I urge you to remember, that fiscal policy deals only with government spending or changes in taxes. So involves government spending or changes in taxes. Does not involve a change in the money supply, so has nothing to do with the money supply, has nothing to do with interest rates. Okay, so it may say something like this: the government is pursuing an expansionary fiscal policy, and one example of this is lowering the interest rates. And you think, well, look, if the economy is struggling, lowering the interest rates would help the economy. But that is not fiscal policy, that is monetary policy. And we're going to talk about that after test number 2. So don't mix in changes in interest rates and changes in the money supply, because that has to do with monetary policy and it has nothing to do with fiscal policy. So this is an important thing to remember. If you see an answer that has changes in money or changes in interest rates, immediately you know that that's not the correct answer. That's out. Okay. All right. Folks, at this point, can anybody tell me when the government pursues expansionary fiscal policy, what are some of the problems with expansionary fiscal policy? One problem, I'm gonna get you going, and maybe you can give me the name of this problem. The fact that government spending replaces private spending. Does anybody remember what is the name for when government spending replaces private spending? In other words, government spending goes up, and as a result, private spending goes down. What is the name for that?
The crowding out effect?
The crowding out effect, exactly, the crowding out effect. So basically, one of the problems with expansionary fiscal policy is that increases in government spending are also associated with decreases in private spending, because it makes the cost of borrowing money more expensive. It tends to raise the interest rates, and that brings the cost of borrowing money more expensive for the private sector. Okay, and the other one was another problem with expansionary fiscal policy, and that involves trade, was that increases in government spending tend to lead to increases in the value of the, anybody? The value of the, what am I doing here? I'm not doing anything related.
Dollar or the money?
Exactly. It is the value of the dollar is the increases. So increases in government spending tend to lead to increases in the value of the dollar vis-a-vis other currencies. And when the dollar goes up in value and other currencies are actually going down in value with respect to the dollar, now foreigners are finding our goods to be very expensive, and they're going to buy less from us. So you have on one hand, government spending and creating more demand for goods and services by buying more goods, but this is gonna lead to a higher value for the dollar, which is gonna lead to our exports actually going down. So you have government spending more and stimulating aggregate demand in a positive way, but foreigners buying less from us and stimulating aggregate demand in a negative way. And that is called the open economy effect. Okay. So those were some of the problems with expansionary fiscal policy. Now, contractionary fiscal policy, you will rarely see a deliberate act on the part of the government to pursue contractionary fiscal policy. In other words, the government is going to say, well, we got to cool off the economy, or the economy is too good for its own good, and we better do something. We better reduce our spending or raise taxes on people so that they will spend less. Okay, that doesn't happen. And even when the economy is very, very powerful, is doing great, when the economy is doing great and is in danger of leading to inflation, most of the time the government will not intervene and they will not pursue a contractionary fiscal policy, because that leads to people losing jobs. Okay, and elected officials, Congress people, they don't be in a position where they're causing people to lose their jobs. It may be in the long-term interest of the country that aggregate demand should be reduced, but nobody wants to be directly involved in people losing jobs. So you're not going to have a contractionary fiscal policy. What's going to happen? You're going to have probably a monetary policy. That's when the Fed comes in, and the Fed may do something to the money supply or to the interest rates to slow down the economy, because obviously the Fed is not elected by us, by voters, so they don't have that connection where if they cause a little bit of harm, they're going to be immediately held responsible for that. So so that's why it's rare that the government pursues contractionary fiscal policy. Okay. Also, last class, we talked about automatic stabilizers. And can anybody give me an example of a tool that is available for automatic stabilizers? Nobody has to intervene, and automatic stabilizers do not require the action of Congress. They don't have to increase taxes or reduce spending or increase spending or whatever, because they take place automatically. Anybody, can you remember one of the examples of automatic stabilizers?
Unemployment insurance programs?
Exactly. Yep. So they kick in, they put the money into the economy when the economy is hurting, but all that money is accumulated when times are good, and therefore it takes money out of the economy when we are all employed and we're able to pay this money, and then when we are unemployed, we get this money back. Okay, very good. I'm actually using this because, folks, believe it or not, chapter 13 is talking about expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. What are the tools? And that's about it. So I'm kind of like done with expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. So I'm a little bit using this lecture as a review. I'm still going to do a review nevertheless. Folks, Do you remember the formula for the spending multiplier? In other words, let's say that we have the government pursuing an expansionary fiscal policy, and we said that an increase in government spending will result in an increase in the GDP that is going to be greater than the increase in the initial increase in government spending. And the reason for that is because we have a spending multiplier. Do you remember the formula for the spending multiplier?
Isn't it 1 over MPS?
Good. Very good. I thought you were going to say 1 over MPC, but you said 1 over MPS. Very good. Yeah. Or another way of saying the same thing is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC, which is the same as MPS. So you're absolutely right. So if I give you the size of the recessionary or contractionary gap, if I give you the size of that gap and I give you the MPS or I give you the MPC, you should be able to calculate by how much government spending has to increase in order to increase the GDP by the size of the gap, in order to close that gap. Very good. All right. Now, I just want to say that next class, what we're going to do tomorrow, I will talk about 2 different schools of economic thought. And one school is classical economics. And in classical economics, they actually they do not believe in active fiscal policy. So they'll basically saying, well, if the economy is in a recession, that's going to be short-lived. Don't worry about it because the economy has naturally has ways of getting out of that recession by itself without any government intervention. Okay, so government intervention only exacerbates the business cycles. Instead of having a business cycle like this, it has a business cycle like that. So it makes it doesn't make much sense to have active fiscal policy. The other school of economic thought is the Keynesian view. And Keynesian view says, well, don't give me this because in classical model they say, well, in the long run the economy will always be okay. And Keynes came in and they said, well, don't give me this in the long run everything is going to be fine because in the long run we're all going to be dead. So this doesn't work, don't in the long run, don't worry about it, everything is begin. Well, who knows how long is this long run, because it could be if it's 50 years, I'm not going to get to see that long run. So if the economy is struggling, the government has to intervene because if the economy is struggling, that means that aggregate demand is less than it should be. So when the economy is in a recession, we don't want to spend money because nobody wants to spend money like crazy when people are getting laid off, right? And businesses don't want to spend money and open up new plants and buy new machinery when they don't know whether they're going to be able to be open tomorrow. Foreigners, it depends on their economy. That it doesn't depend on our economy. So if businesses don't do it and we don't do it, then somebody has to do it. And Keynes says, well, then the government has to step in. And we're going to take a look at, well, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions under the classical model? How come they say there's no need for government intervention? And how come in the Keynesian model, they say, well, no, there is a need for government intervention, because what those guys said, the classical view, that doesn't work in the real life. And since those 2 economic thoughts are rather old, Keynesian economic model comes from the 20s and 30s, so they're rather old. We're gonna look at a contemporaneous example and see how actually people react. And so we're gonna come to modern times. Okay, well, at this point, any questions, any comments? So for example, folks, on an exam, keep it simple. Do not overthink the questions. I can guarantee you, if you start overthinking the question, you're probably going to end up with the wrong answer. You know, they are fairly straightforward. So whatever pops into your mind as soon as you read it, that's you know, I have so many times where people told me, oh my gosh, I marked all those answers and then I changed them. Why did you change them? Well, I went over them again and well, that's what you get for thinking about it. Okay. Let me see here. Yeah, it's an easy, this chapter 13, it's easy, much easier than the others.